Well, we want to thank everyone for being here today. My name is Shane Schoeller, candidate for Secretary of State, and pleased to be here with Ed Martin today. And today, we're here to talk about one of the most fundamental rights that we have been given in our system of government, and that's free and fair elections. Last week, we saw Secretary Carnahan once again abuse the power of her office and allow her own liberal, political, biased agenda come forth when she wrote the ballot measures last week. We've seen her do it time and time again. And that's why I've been at the forefront since I announced my candidacy that we need to do a better job of ensuring that every time people go to the ballot, they have fair language, that it's accountable, that it's transparent. And we saw with the health insurance exchange language, especially last week when she used the word deny, we saw her political viewpoints come through just like she did 2 years ago when she used the word puppy mill in Proposition B. And so I think it's important that we take a serious look at these issues. That's why I've asked Speaker Tilley to appoint an intercommittee, and let's take a very sincere look at how we go about the ballot measure process and how we write the ballot count and ballot summary. And what I propose, and one of the ideas that I came up with earlier in the year during my campaign, is that we have what I call the Fair Ballot Accountability Act. And I think it's important that we allow the citizens to be involved in the ballot writing process. You know, citizens oftentimes, they get the ballot initiatives going from the citizens, from the ground up, and then citizens get to vote on it. But right now, there's no accountability when it comes to the Secretary of State once that ballot measure is written. And what this will do is hopefully help us be able to avoid the costly and time-consuming portions of lawsuits, which is the only recourse we have right now if people do not accept the ballot language as written. So I believe it's time to move forward in that. That's why I'm pleased to be able to be here today and say that I'm hopeful that Speaker Tilley will appoint this committee. I'm confident that he will, and we can move forward and make sure that every citizen is represented and that, again, we have fair ballot language, that the language is held accountable, and it's transparent. And I know that Ed has a few things to say from the portion of the Attorney General. And
yep.
So,
yeah, thank you. Thanks Shane. We're at a critical moment in Missouri history. And for about the 5th or 6th time now, we've seen the Attorney General of Missouri fail to do his job. By statute and by law and by the Constitution, the Attorney General is supposed to be at the ready, standing up for Missourians. In this case, the statute says, and this is very important for the Secretary of State candidates and others to know, the Secretary of State must certify language. It must be approved by the Attorney General, who must say that the language is legally sufficient and is appropriate to go on the ballot. In this case, what is supposed to be a vote of the people in November about whether we do or don't want health care exchanges, in other words, whether we want Obamacare to be implemented, we have had the Secretary of State write language that talks about denying affordable care to people. That's not at all what this is about. As we all know, the health care exchanges will either be set up by Missouri or forced upon us by the federal government. Now, we all hope, both Shane and I hope the law will be changed by the time it comes to it, but this will not deny anyone affordable care. What the Attorney General should have done instead of certifying this language or approving this language was sending it back to the Attorney General, to the Secretary of State to make her write language that was not misleading and that was true and accurate instead of being not just misleading but factually incorrect. So we're at a critical moment. We have to fight Obamacare on every front. Today we saw that there's a lawsuit pending now. Both Shane and I support that. There's been a call for a special session. I support anything we can do to fight Obamacare, and we have to start with making sure that this ballot language goes on in November so that our people can vote, Missourians can vote on it, and make sure. And Chris Koster, yet again, has failed to fight Obamacare, and we shouldn't be surprised, but we shouldn't stop fighting back on that. And that's why I'm glad to join Shane as we've been around the state to talk about this. And I think we'd take any questions. State law?
That's a federal.
Yeah, federal for sure.
That's a federal provision that nobody should be denied care if they're in any type of emergency health care situation if they go to the emergency room.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess, yes, federal law, there's federal laws that protect people in particular need. There are state laws that cover eligibility for Medicaid and for other of the sort of what we call safety net programs, that you can't be denied access to those programs if you otherwise qualify. What the healthcare exchanges are being set up, though, to broadly to expand the options of people being able to buy insurance on the exchange. So healthcare exchanges are not, putting them or not having them is not denying or giving people access to care. It's the government controlling what choices you have, and that's the big difference.
And again, it goes back to, we want to make sure that when that ballot language is written, that it's clear, there's no confusion to it, and that's why we think the citizen's voice needs to have more part of the process than what it currently does. Essentially, as I said earlier, the legislature has the opportunity to put initiatives on the ballot like this one. However, oftentimes the ballot initiative process was there to ensure that it guards the best interests of the citizens of the state of Missouri if the legislature is failing to act upon those interests. And so, as you know, you go and you get the required number of signatures, and then the Secretary of State approves those signatures. And once you have that particular legislation, the Secretary of State is supposed to write the ballot summary and the ballot title in order to be able to allow the citizen, when they come to vote, to understand what this particular ballot initiative addresses. And right now, other than the Attorney General, as you can see with the process we have now, that there is very little, if no accountability, other than going through the courts to be able to challenge the Secretary of State. And that's where I contend, let's try to take a step back, look at the process we have and say, can the citizens be more involved? Because I use the three words, we the people. Our founding fathers understood that the citizens' voice always needs to be heard and listened to. And right now, their voice is not heard when the ballot title and ballot summary is written. And I'm one of those folks, I think it's important that, especially if it's driven by the citizens, they may not have the necessary resources to be able to hire the attorneys and be able to afford the cost of going through litigation, and this would afford them the opportunity. And the only time it would be triggered the way we're designing it is if somebody comes forward and says, we believe this is unfair, and at that point the bipartisan commission comes together, takes a look at it, reviews it, and has an opportunity to be able to write alternate ballot language if they believe that the ballot language is written unfairly.
Let me say something about where we are in Missouri and in America. About 10 years ago now, we know, publicly accounted for, that George Soros funded the campaigns of Secretary of State candidates who would do just what is happening in Missouri and happened in Minnesota, and that is bring ideology into the office and make sure that at every turn, whether it's the language for ballots or calling balls and strikes on elections, that they would be a far left ideology. No one denies that Robin Carnahan is Soros's Secretary of State. That's what she's been for all 8 years. She's been following the far left agenda. And we have Chris Koster, the Attorney General, who we call Obama's lawyer, who's just rolled over at what's happened with Obama's plans, whether it's Obamacare or the EPA or Arizona. And here's the difference. We've got to get elected officials who will actually respect the law, respect the will of the people. It's not true we're always going to like what the people want. There are times where we've had initiatives on the ballot, 06, other times where I would say I voted against an initiative that passed. The role of a Secretary of State and Attorney General is to abide by the law and be a leader that respects the will of the people. And we have Chris Koster and Robin Carnahan and others who have decided that they will make not just the law, but they'll just make up the rules when it comes to elections and initiatives. And it has to stop. I think most voters have had enough of it, whatever party. That's why you're seeing Democrats vote Republican and independents vote conservative and Tea Party people pulling votes, because it's just gone too far. And I think that's what's at stake, and that's why people are so fed up. And again, the number one goal, in my mind, for all Missourians should be to stop Obamacare. And when we have a Governor, Nixon, Attorney General Koster, and a Secretary of State, Carnahan, that want to implement Obamacare and destroy our health care, we have to do everything we can to fight back, and this is one way to do it. The Secretary of State's role is more salient at this point. When you get the language from the legislature, the Secretary of State's required to draft the language for the ballot language and the summary, submit it to the Attorney General, and he has to return it. He's already returned the language. So the Attorney General's job, again, is not to decide he or she wants to write the ballot language or the summary. It's to obey the law. Chris Koster should have looked at it and said this is misleading as to the law and sent it back to Secretary Carnahan to rewrite. I think, she could solve this problem by rewriting the ballot language in the summary, admitting that she made a mistake and saying this is misleading on its face. But her track record is such that it's very unlikely, and so none of us expect that.
Yeah, and I think in follow-up, that's why when you have two individuals like Secretary Carnahan and Attorney General Koster who have very liberal, biased agendas, we need to make sure going forward we always have accountability. You know, as an opportunity I've had to be in elected office, I believe in accountability. I think it makes you a better person when you're in elected office. And right now there's no accountability for the ballot writing process when you're Secretary of State. And I think that window of 2 elections where you don't have accountability can have significant consequences. And we can look at the track record of Secretary Carnahan, and when that liberal bias is shown through, it has a huge outcome on how people end up voting on those ballots. Because I tell folks, a lot of times folks show up the ballot, they're doing their best to be able to make it. They may have 1 or 2 jobs, they're trying to raise a family. They may not have had the opportunity to get as educated as they want, or they weren't aware the ballot measure was going to be there to vote on. So what you have to do is make sure, Secretary of State, you're doing your due diligence to be fair and to make sure when they vote on it they understand. But when you, for example, use the word puppy mill, what folks didn't understand voting that is that they weren't just affecting the bad actors, they were affecting the people who were also abiding by the law at that time. And that's where I think you need to have someone who doesn't allow their political bias to show through, because we have a number of dog breeders across the state who abide by the law as it was at that time, were very careful how they treated their animals, and yet when you read that ballot title, you would have thought you were only affecting the people who mistreat their animals. And that's where it was an abuse of office, abuse of the privilege she's been given by the voters, and that's where accountability matters, and that's where I know that the Fair Ballot Accountability Act can make a difference.
Anything else? Okay, thank you.